Well, hello. Today we are at Killaney Medieval Graveyard, and I am currently between Ballynahinch and Saintfield. You're looking at Lough there, and then as I turn round you can start to see the drumlins of County Down with Lough in the distance. You can see some of the Belfast mountains there just as you make it out. And I'm going to do the 360 here back to the graveyard. Now, some absolutely very interesting history on this. This is the original site of Killaney Parish Church. Now, Killaney Parish Church is currently St Andrew's Church on the main carried off the Ballynahinch Road, but this is where the original parish church was, and it was given permission by on a land grant from John de Courcy in 1194, and the church was destroyed in the Irish Rebellion in 1641, but the graveyard has remained ever since, and this graveyard stands at the top of a fairly high hill overlooking lakes and marshes all around it. And I'm just going through the grass here, and you can see Lough. Obviously in the shape of a bow, it goes for a considerable distance down the field there. And this plot here is where Killaney Parish Church was from 1194 until 1641. Absolutely amazing. Church ruins aren't here anymore, but the graveyard still stands, and you can come with me as we have a look inside and have a look at some of the memorable gravestones. Just that I'm thinking, I want to give a shout out to the Church History Trail, my friend Mark Porter on YouTube. If you're interested in a video like this, he'll be a fantastic resource. He pumps out a lot of content, and some of his videos are absolutely amazing. So as we explore here, let's just go over the style. I have very been kindly given a lot of information and knowledge and permission to come as often as I want by the voluntary caretaker Henry. He essentially maintains the graveyard, and he does a fantastic job. Really appreciate, Henry, all the information you've given me. Just as I go over the style there in the gate, that style there is actually a recycled gravestone, completely unreadable now, but it's been put in its place even before Henry's time, so perhaps up to 100 years. You can just see Lough in the distance. Is that beautiful? So let's have a look around the graveyard, and as we go around, let's think about the name Killaney. So Killaney basically means the church on the marsh. And as you look there all around us, you can see quite bizarrely it was a church, and more even a graveyard that was put on top of a hill. You can imagine back 500 years, 1,000 years, there just would have been marsh all around here, and they decided to plant Killaney Parish Church here. And I also kind of think back to a lot of the Scottish settlers that would have come here around 400 or 500 years ago after the Reformation, and they would have been so used, those Scottish settlers, to life, that transportation would be easily readable, and they could just travel about. So whenever they did come here and begin to settle to the Ulster plantation, they would have done a lot of agricultural drainage that would have essentially created the landscape that you see today. So many thanks to the generations that went past that allow us the freedom of roads and transportation that really removed away the marshes, that we can enjoy our travel today. So here's the first gravestone I want to show you. If you come here and you walk around, you'll notice that so many gravestones are commemorating the family line of Edgar, and here is a very prominent one. It was put up by a Reverend Edgar's family, is a relative of the famous John Edgar, who I'm going to refer to a little bit later in the video. I think it was congregation and friends erected this headstone 200 years ago, and many Edgars are buried in this particular one. Obviously it's seen a better day. I have a very significant crack down the middle of it, and some of the wear and tear on the right hand side of the grave as well. Fortunately it hasn't been maintained, but that's just what happens when hundreds of years pass. And this is perhaps one of the most impressive gravestones in the medieval graveyard. And this is commemorated to a professor of, I guess, the forerunner of Union College, the Presbyterian Synod in Ireland. He was a professor. He was Reverend D. Edgar, who I believe was the father of John Edgar, who again I'm going to come to a little bit later in the video. It was almost like it was almost, you'd think it was the original ruins of the church, but it's actually a very significant crypt that has obviously seen better days and has been completely grown over, but still an impressive crypt. Very, very large. Must be about 15 feet by 15 feet, even a roof at times. I'm sure that could be cleared away and be very impressive. So walk with me here. What is the oldest grave in this particular graveyard? I don't know. Henry advised that the oldest marked gravestone is this little one here. And you can just see there, I don't know, it looks like it says N25, but I'm sure it can't be that, so it must say something else. But it's marked quite clearly 1757. So, if you're watching from America, this particular graveyard is over 20 years older than the Declaration of Independence. So I'm standing here in a place that is older than the United States of America itself. So that's the oldest marked grave, but if you walk around here you will start to see unmarked and unwritten gravestones here. These are a row of stones, and I very would be doubtful if they're younger than that grave. So I suspect that yes, there are graves, of course, marked out that are much older than 1757. I just don't know how old they are, but we do know that from history that the parish church was originally built here. It was issued in land by John de Courcy in 1194. There was a church at least standing in 1300, and that church, I have looked around for the ruins. No ruins, unfortunately. The church ruins were destroyed in the Irish Rebellion in 1641. So let's have another look at some of these wonderful tombs. I think, I'm not actually quite sure what that one says, but I'll take you around the back way here and we'll have a look at this one. We'll go over here, careful not to trip over this one. So I think this is of David Shaw from Lough in Crossgar, and you can see the wonderful inscription there, and I think it's an angel that's holding a scroll that says shall rise, or they shall rise. Very interesting. We're going to walk around here. I think this is the most recent burial from 2006. This particular one here, quite fairly large plot. Little bit interesting on it. I don't know if you can see that with the sun, but it says, they being dead yet speaketh. Very interesting. Will you come with me over here and we'll have a look at some of these some interesting stories coming up here. So just as a in fact, if you've subscribed to my channel and you've seen the windmill, that was built by a man called Fitzsimmons. I think this is the graveyard of the man who built that wind turbine 200 years ago. So very interesting. I think this is the tomb here. So we've seen the tower from the former windmill just round the road in Board Mills. This is his tomb 200 years later. We visited his tower and now we visited his grave. So I showed some pictures of Edgar there. I think it was the second one. That was the Reverend D. Edgar, who died in 1826. He was the father of the very famous John Edgar. And this is what I want to spend some time talking about here. Very interesting. Some more very old and well written gravestones. In fact, I'll just take you over this way. Again, you can see Bowlock there, just over there. This is perhaps one of the most impressive graves in the whole place. You can just see at the bottom there. until the day break and the shadows flee away. Burying place of Thomas McNeill. There's a horizontal grave, and you can see just how old the graveyard is. Look at the size of that tree. It must be 30 or 40 feet, and it's actually just spreading out right behind that gravestone in there. So if you're ever in the area, I'm sure you can call in and have a look around. You can spend hours here studying history, but this is really what I want to talk about. So Reverend D. Edgar, just across the way at the start of the video, he was the father of the Reverend John Edgar, who lived from 1798 to 1866. So John himself is buried in Balmoral Cemetery. John Edgar is very, very, very famous, particularly within Ireland and indeed globally, with gospel tracts. And John Edgar was very interested in social activism, which was obviously today it seems like it's a hobby in the 21st century, but 200-300 years ago it was very much a passionate way of life for evangelical Christians, to spread the gospel, not just through the preaching and teaching of God's word, but also through practical help. So this is a particular gravestone that was put up in memory of a man called James Davison, and he was the subject of a gospel tract by the Reverend Edgar. And John Edgar, of course this graveyard is littered with Edgars. He started the temperance movement, and if you're not sure what temperance means, temperance essentially means that because Irish culture was so caught up in binge drinking, I guess it still is today, but particularly 200 years ago, it was so caught up in binge culture that many people of the day, especially evangelical Christians, pushed a message of complete abstinence from alcohol. And there's a very famous story of Reverend John Edgar pouring alcohol out of his window in 1829 and going to Parliament in the 19th century to give his dismay about so many gin houses and public houses where drunkenness and loudness and ruination of society happened in many drinking dens in Belfast and in Dublin. So this particular gravestone is of that man James Davison, and he's the subject of that gospel piece of literature that spoke out against the ruinations of alcohol. Also, Reverend John Edgar was a man who was involved. I think there's a man coming here in the on the quad here. Reverend John Edgar was a man who spoke about the cry from Connacht, and he was very much concerned for the physical and spiritual famine in Connacht. He focused on the starving at that time during the Irish potato famine, and he had no time to inquire whether they were Protestant or Catholic. He was more concerned about their starving stomachs, and he really reached out to them to ensure that Presbyterian Home Mission was focused on feeding his fellow man before they could starve and hear the gospel. And finally, I want to also talk about Reverend John Edgar. He also focused on Gaelic preaching, and he was very critical of the Church of Ireland, and he spoke on the Anglican Church not speaking to people in the south of Ireland and the north of Ireland and they should be preaching in their mother tongue in Gaelic. Very interesting. Today obviously the battle lines have been drawn politically, and there's been so much focus now today on pushing the Irish language to the side, but it's impressive to come to places like this, and history isn't always quite as clear as what you think. Even 200 years ago, Presbyterian ministers were focusing on spreading the gospel and preaching that even through the means of Gaelic. I'm sure the landlord's here, the landowner's here. He's round in his quad. I might go over and have a chat with him, but if ever you're in the area, I'm sure you'd be welcome to come and visit this very impressive history-making place, full of religion and church history and even non-church history. So many people have lived here down the generations, over and out from Killaney Medieval Graveyard.